I'm Sarah Jones at GÉANT, and I'd like to introduce you to this EUDAT Infoshare that we're running. This comes out of various discussions. We had EUDAT at the conference, the TNC conference last year. They had a stall there where they engaged with various NRENs, and then we participated in the EUDAT conference and also discussed this in the EOS coordination meetings. And there was a desire to learn more about the services and also ways that NRENs could be using them. So we've pulled together this info share. And the main aim is really sharing expertise on how different NRENs are supporting research data management, and also looking specifically at the EUDAT service suite and ways that their services can be used. And we have a couple of case studies from Roberto and from Anssi that will look at how CSC and HEAnet are picking up on the EUDAT services. So the agenda we have today, I'll give a quick introduction to the role of NRENs in data management and how different NRENs are getting involved. And then Debora will give us a brief introduction to the EUDAT services, just to contextualize those so that they make more sense when you hear the two different case studies. And then we'll close again with Debora talking about what EUDAT can offer NRENs and how to get involved. And we have plenty of time for Q&A. So by all means, put questions in. We can take them from the different speakers for clarification at the end of each presentation, but also we can have time for discussion at the end for more broader themes that come up across the different talks. And we'll put all the slides online and the recording afterwards as well. So as you'll have seen from the notification, the meeting is being recorded. If you don't want to be shown on the video, by all means, just keep your video off and stay muted ideally during the presentation so we don't have the background noise. You can ask questions in the chat as we go, and Leo's here. If you've got any technical issues, let us know and we can try and troubleshoot them during the presentation. Okay, so that's the housekeeping out of the way. I'll just get started on the role of NRENs in data management and some first kind of thoughts really about why it's important to engage in this area of work and how different people are doing that. So I think there's many reasons NRENs are relevant for data management. So researchers are based within higher education institutions, and that's where their main provision to store, collaborate, publish, and share data comes from those universities. And really, NRENs provide the critical e-infrastructure that underlies the different services that universities are using. So the network connection, obviously, the different trust and identity services and single sign-on so that relevant people have access to the content. And increasingly, NRENs are getting more involved in the above-net data services as well. So we'll see things like the switch drive or research drive type services, getting involved in data management planning tools or lab notebook services and offering those to institutions. And one of the things that I think is an interesting development is how NRENs are often helping broker service contracts. So they may not be delivering services directly themselves, but helping institutions pick up relevant services from commercial or other providers. And the CRIS systems procurement framework that HEAnet is an example of that. And I think really because NRENs are, their members are universities, that's who they're working for. I think you're well positioned to help provide the kind of national advocacy and coordination. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it's important for NRENs to engage in this area of work. I just want to touch first on the kind of work that's happening within universities and then see how NRENs are supporting it. So universities are obviously doing a lot around research data management and open science, offering various services throughout the research data lifecycle and lots of kind of hands-on support. So consultations with researchers so that they can plan their data management well from the start. They know what services they can access either through the institution or externally. And then also running training courses and providing kind of human support, often through data stewards and software engineers. And in many institutions, I think increasingly across kind of Western Europe in particular, there's often kind of steering committees at the institutional level to make sure that this kind of support is more joined up and that they're thinking at a strategic level on what's needed within the institution. So as I mentioned, universities often have many data services in place, from CRIS systems to kind of manage the research information management about the different grants and the outputs that are coming, data management planning tools to help researchers plan their work and respond to funder requirements, and then the kind of support that's needed while researchers are undertaking their work. So the lab notebooks, the kind of analysis tools, and all of the storage, so they have collaborative environments to share with the people they're undertaking that research with. And then also services to preserve and publish the outputs long term. So data repository services and often preservation services as well, so that they can ensure that content is safe and accessible long term. Now, some of the challenges unis face when delivering these different data management services is that it's often different service units responsible for each system. So they're not always acquired with a systematic view of kind of the data exchange and the connections between the different systems. And that means that there can often be a lack of interoperability across those different systems and re-entering of data. So not the ideal scenarios for the researchers. It's not the best ease of use. So there's a need to coordinate across the actors within the different universities, the different service units, but also I think across the universities to try and get a better presentation of research services. And I think that's really a place where NRENs can play a role, because your members are the universities. And I think working at that national level is a real good opportunity for NRENs to try and help coordinate the work and improve the provision. So I want to pick up on the different roles various NRENs are playing around research data management and open science. And I think often that national coordination role is quite strong. So 20 NRENs plus GÉANT are members of EOSC Association, and another 3 are observers. And what we've seen is that many NRENs are appointed as mandated organisations within EOSC. I think there's a recognition that they represent the national interests, and really because they're doing a lot of the kind of core service provision, that they're well placed to understand the user needs and try and help deliver on open science. And that coordination role is often picked up within different countries. When we hear Roberto talk, you might mention RESIN. This is the Research Services and Infrastructure Forum in Ireland. And this is a way to bring together different service units from individual universities and to get discussion going on a national level about what their needs are. And this is actually what's led to the identification as needing more support around data storage and the pilot that Roberto will pick up on. So often NRENs are running fora like the EOSC Finnish fora, where CSC are playing a key role to bring together the different providers and to understand those national needs and interests. To give an example of the kind of support programs different NRENs run, I wanted to flag the work from Dyke around FAIR. They had a FAIR across disciplines program that they ran for a couple of years, and that produced various different outputs. It was trying to help increase FAIR practice. So they have case studies on FAIR practice in different disciplines. And they ran a number of metadata for machines workshops to help different communities improve their standards adoption, and developed verification roadmaps to again increase the good practice. And there are a number of outputs they developed: online training courses, and a fairy tale, a kind of mystical story to get across the key components and ideas around FAIR. And they're available for reuse, so you can pick up on those and use them if you're trying to support FAIR in your own work too. NRENs are also often involved in delivering different national services, and I give 2 examples here. So within ULUC-Beam, the Aperta repository that they offer, a kind of open data, multidisciplinary repository, is something they run at the national level for all the researchers in Turkey. And that's assigning DOIs, using schema.org to make sure that the data is discoverable and reusable. But it's not always just providing the services yourself. Within Sweden, for example, EUDAT facilitates access to DMP Online for all the Swedish universities. So it's one national contract, but each institution has its own kind of local front end and administrative access. But that's handled through EUDAT for the different universities. So there's different ways of getting involved in data management services. Within SURF, this is an example where they offer lots of research support. Oops, don't know why that one jumped, so I'll just go back. I think there must be timings on the slide. So lots of things around different storage. So they have like the research drive service, but also the kind of data archive and object store for high quantities of data. And they're also running the repository service and services like File Sender to make it easy for researchers to move data around. So NRENs are getting involved in various different ways, running all types of services. And the last couple of examples I wanted to flag is really around the procurement aspects. So from HEAnet, I mentioned before, they consulted with all the universities in Ireland to understand the main CRIS systems that were in use there, and then ran a series of market engagements with the different providers to help them come on to a procurement framework. And based on the needs within the country, they really focused on the qualitative elements within that evaluation so that people could choose services based on quality, not just price. And really what this framework offers is it makes it a lot easier for the institutions to get a CRIS system in place because they can run a kind of mini tender process and not having to go through the full process themselves. And similarly, JISC did a dynamic purchasing system for repositories. They wanted a DPS so it was more flexible so that suppliers could join at any time. And they have a number of suppliers on that, and their first few institutions actually awarding contracts for repositories based on that. And they're now at the stage of looking to kind of re-sign people up because it's been a couple of years that's been in place. So this is a way that various NRENs are also helping put different data management services in place. And I think within the case studies, what we'll see is, sometimes you may be running these different services yourself, but you may also just be a broker or a facilitator to it. So just to close, I think there's lots of reasons why it's useful for NRENs to get involved in research data management. I think we shouldn't undervalue the fact that NRENs are in all of the member states and associated countries. So it's a very strong European infrastructure that you can build a lot of other things on. And already with the services that NRENs have been delivering, you've shown robust and reliable delivery at scale and very strong sustainable business models. And I think because the NRENs are working for universities who are the ones dealing with these data management issues day to day, it's a really good place to partner with them. And it's a strong community within the NRENs to try and help lobby for changes. So when we're dealing with service providers or looking at the needs of the sector, I think we have a very strong voice collectively. So it's a good thing to use to try and help improve the management of data and the services that are provided. So that's all I wanted to say. I'll just come back to the other screen to stop the share. And if there's any questions I didn't see in the chat, if there are. Oh, I don't know why that's not. There you go. That's stopped the share now, I think. Has it, Leo? No?
Yes, you stopped the presentation, not the screen sharing.
It's not actually letting me jump onto that. Maybe because let me bring my cursor back over here.
I stopped the sharing for you.
Now, oh, perfect. Thank you very much. My cursor wouldn't jump onto that screen. So any questions before we move on with the next presentation and learn about the EUDAT services from Debora? No, I don't see any hands raised. Hang on, one in chat maybe. Let me just open up the chat. How are NRENs handling DMP processing? So I don't know that many NRENs have got involved in actually processing the DMP, so actually the implementation, which is what I'm guessing you're referring to there. I know some NRENs are involved in trying to help, kind of offer the national services, like the SUNET example I gave there, but they're not involved in the day-to-day processing, not so much creation, but validation and assessment. I think that's still very much on the institutions and also on the funders. So I know within institutions, they often offer review services for DMPs where they'll, check that the content's valid, and then also have follow-ups to check that that's actually the practice that's been conducted during the research. I'm not aware of any examples where NRENs are getting actively involved in the day-to-day data management, just in, essentially facilitating access to the services. But if anyone else on the call wants to pick up, if you have examples, then by all means do. And the assessment often happens through the research funders. Yeah, and Roberto's just confirming in Ireland, it's mainly the institutes for the creation. Universities often have support services, data stewards in place that can help with the creation of the DMP. And in terms of assessment, funders are still kind of getting used to that practice. But I think, in the Netherlands and in the UK, there is some assessment often done. And within the European Commission, it's the project officers who will often look at the DMPs. Okay, excellent. Thanks, Joelle. Okay, then I'll hand over to Debora.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me fine.
Yeah, we hear you. Yeah, sorry.
So nice to meet you all virtually. I'm Debora Testi. I'm from Cineca Supercomputing Center in Italy, and I'm part of EUDAT as a user engagement coordinator in the Secretariat. So I will use just a few minutes to give a quick overview on what is EUDAT about for those who do not know yet about EUDAT. And as Sarah mentioned, a very quick overview on the service catalog and what the different services are about, so that you will have a bit of knowledge before hearing the use cases that will be presented after me. Okay, so that I already said. So first of all, EUDAT started already almost 15 years ago, even more. It started as a series of EU-funded projects that were used mainly to start the development of the different services. After the EU-funded period, the network of service provider and communities joined together into a partnership agreement that has been signed in 2016 and is currently signed for 10 years, but is planned to be renewed in the near future. And since 2018, we also have a limited company that is taking care of all the, say, contractual, more administrative part of EUDAT. We are, in any case, still relying a lot on some EU funding projects. We are very much involved in all the EUSC initiative, European Open Science Cloud, through before it was EUSCAP, now it's EUS Future, and many other EUSC-related projects. We are very active on this work of interoperability and exchange with other providers. And we have, since January 2021, we have a project called DICE, which I will mention later, but the main advantage for users of this project is that we are able to offer resources free at the point of use for any user in Europe. So it's a nice opportunity to catch up on. So, but what is EUDAT? So EUDAT is a collaborative data infrastructure, one of the biggest in Europe. And the vision of EUDAT is that data should be shared and preserved across border and disciplines. So to achieve this vision, EUDAT members have developed and now operate a set of services that are meant to support researchers in all the steps of the research data lifecycle and data management. So if we look at a typical research data lifecycle, it's just a different representation of what Sarah presented just a minute ago. If we look at all the steps that are involved in the data management, basically the EUDAT services are covering most of it. What is basically left out are the steps related to the data processing and either pre-processing, post-processing, so either anything related to the analysis. All the other steps are covered by one or more of the EUDAT services. If we, so this is our service suite. It is composed by mainly 6 services, which are our in our catalog that go from user management, data management and preservation, data access and sharing, and data discovery. I will just say a few more words on each of them, basically going per category of services. So as I mentioned already, we do not have any service dealing with data analysis and processing, even if some of the EUDAT services are easily connectable or it's possible to integrate them with data analysis tool or processing tool, but it's not part of our catalog. So if we start from the bottom of the pyramid, we have what we call personal and project workspace, which is represented by our B2Drop service. It's a midterm sync and share service for sharing across peers still active data. And yeah. Then we have, oops, sorry, why I pressed the wrong arrow, sorry for that. Then we have B2Save, which is a policy-based data archive, which means that on top of the basic storage resources, you have the possibility to set up some policy related to data management, right? Replication, assignment of persistent identifiers, and many other that can be customized according to the user. Then we have our sharing repository service, which is B2Share, which is obviously meant for long-term preservation of data and not non-active data, and is meant for really publishing to the greater world. It can be, each data set can be associated to a set of metadata that can be customized to the specific communities, assign a DOI, a persistent identifier to be used in publication, and many other features that the service provide. Our B2Handle service is the service that allows you to obtain and manage a persistent identifier, so prefix and persistent identifier. Then we also, the EUDAT members also can host the PIDs that are generated during the lifetime of the work and can be assigned to the different data set for later reference. Again, sorry. We have recently added to our persistent identifier offer also the DOI provided by DataSite. So EUDAT has become a DataSite member. So we are now also supporting DOIs offering to our customers. And at the very top of the pyramid, there is B2Find, which is our search portal for searching data across different communities. So B2Find harvests from different repository of different communities and allows you to search across different community repositories. It is also then harvested by OpenAir Explorer, so it gives visibility to the dataset to a broader audience. And that, yeah, and then just another quick word. As I said, we have now this EC-funded project called DICE, which is offering data management services to European users. Mainly these are EUDAT services, but there are also a few more. That means that all the, not just the service setup and configuration, but also the resources behind that, meaning storage or hosting of dataset, is free at the point of use. This will be until the end of June this year. It's not a long time still, but we think it's idea for piloting the different services. I have an idea how they work at no cost. Even if I have to say that some of our central EUDAT services are in any case free for user. We will get back to that probably after the use case presentation. Yeah, then just another mention that services can be used obviously individually for their specific use or in combination, or also in combination with service from other providers that are not specifically EUDAT. Yeah, that was just to give a quick overview, just so that you would not be completely lost when my colleagues immediately after me will mention some of the B2 services. So hopefully, but if you have any question now, we can also address them now.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Deborah. Yeah, it's good background context so people understand the overview of the service suite. Any questions anyone wants to raise just now? You can raise a hand or put something in chat. And apologies to Galina, I'd missed your question earlier. I've answered in chat, but if others want to speak about data governance support that NRENs offer, I'm not aware of too much, but if you have examples to share, by all means add them to the chat or speak out as well. Okay. Then if you can stop screen sharing, Deborah, then we'll come on to Roberto, who's going to give us a short case study on the work that's going on at HEAnet and their pilot with EUDAT.
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute myself. I couldn't find the button.
Yeah,
Good afternoon,
perfect.
all.
If you can put it into the full screen mode, that would be great. Yeah, perfect.
That's better. Yeah.
Thanks, Roberto.
Yeah, so yeah, good afternoon. I will be talking today about a pilot that we have just started in November with the EUDAT on data management services for research. Yeah. So first of all, some context. We are a typical NREN, NEN, I would say, National Education Network, with some work started in the last few years, focusing more on the R side of things. And we have the core network, identity, brokerage. These are very strong activities that have been conducted for many years at HEAnet. But we don't really have a history in service aspects of research data management. We have had some history in terms of generic storage provisioning, which has since been decommissioned. But in terms of research data management, there's been no history until recently within HEAnet. But that is changing. In the last couple of years, we have increasing our interest in this area, partly driven by the EOSC activities. We are, as Sarah hinted there earlier, we are the mandated member for Ireland in the EOSC Association. We are also representing our ministry. They have delegated the work to us in the EOSC steering board. So we have a very strong involvement at international level in the EOSC developments, and therefore, obviously, interest in the area of research data management is increasing. That's from a HEAnet perspective. If we look at a national institutional perspective, that's also growing a lot in the last few years. We've had North, which was established, formally established 2017, and since 2019, really starting a lot of work looking at the whole spectrum of open science and open research in Ireland, and amongst us, of course, data management. If we look at what's available today in Ireland for supporting research data management, there's a scarcity of services. There are some examples at institutional level that offer some services, but it's very diverse across institutes. And the result of this is that researchers are really crying out for a well-shaped, well-organized data management service, at least for the active data, for that part of the life cycle. In terms of repositories, there are repositories, but it's really that active phase, which is until now poorly organized, poorly funded, and so on. Where does the EUDAT come in here? Well, if we look at technology and services, for me, they are a clear and obvious partner. It makes perfect sense to partner with them to address this challenge. And we've been able to do that. Through the North work, there has been a number of pilot awards, or sorry, project awards to advance the open science agenda in Ireland. And one of those is on a pilot for active data. And we have been successful in that. We being, well, HEAnet, we are the principal investigators, but we've partnered with 5 other organizations, iCheck, which is our national HPC centre, University College Cork, University College Dublin, Southeastern Technical University, they're based in Waterford, and EUDAT for the technology and the service to conduct this pilot. We also have several use cases from across the board. Pretty much all the universities in Ireland have representation as pilot use case in this pilot service, and many disciplines as well are represented. We have life sciences, there's bioimaging, there's sensoring, and earth sciences, and more. It's a 2-year pilot project that runs from 1st November last year until the 31st of October 2024. It's a very limited budget. I won't say how much it is, but it's very limited, but it gets us started on this pilot. So what are the aims of this pilot? It's understanding researcher data storage and sharing requirements. Given that we are focusing on the active phase, it's really about sharing with collaborators and peers during the active phase of research. Build a platform that to be tested and that researchers can use. We also want to design and understand how to manage and how to operate it, and what the governance model would be. But above all, I think the most important thing that is going to come out of this is at the end of the 2 years, we do need to have a service definition document, which will have a shopping list attached to it, which we will need to send up to our funders to say, look, this is what we need in Ireland for a production quality sustained service to support research data management in Ireland, at least for the active phase of data. Yeah, so that's going to be very interesting, very challenging to do over the next 2 years, but it is really a key outcome. It's not just a pilot for its own sake, it's really leading to the definition of a national service. So we're doing this in phases, and the first one is really leveraging DICE EOSC that Debora mentioned earlier. She said the services from the EUDAT are free at the point of use with support until June 2023. So in our first phase, we're going to get a subset of our pilot use cases, get them to use the EUDAT services using the EUDAT infrastructure so that they can see how they work. We verify the fitness for purpose, and we all get experience in using these services. Given that we are focusing on the active data, the primary focus is on B2 drop. But it's not only B2 drop. I don't think we can engage pilot users if we force them to look at only one part of their workflow. We have to look at the whole science workflow of researchers, focus on the active phase, which is B2 drop, but where we need to link into repositories or into staging for compute, we need to consider that as well as part of the pilot, because researchers won't do something special for us. They have to do their work as normally as possible. So that's the first phase, which lasts until June 2023. And then we go into phase 2. And this is where we're going to be deploying the EUDAT services on national infrastructure in Ireland. This means that this gains 2 aspects. One, that the users continue to use the EUDAT services, just that they are hosted in Ireland, and it means that as service providers, we gain experience in deploying and managing those services. So the service providers gain know-how as well for this. This lasts from June to the end of the project. The dialogue on how to set up the national infrastructure has already started. In fact, this morning we were on a very lengthy and interesting call with Debora and her colleagues from SURF and from EUDAT to discuss the details of this setup. So yeah, that work has started, and we do plan to have this up and running starting from June onwards. Phase 3 is starts also, well, a little bit later than June, starts in July, maybe August. This is where we engage with the wider community. We have established a stakeholder advisory forum, which is largely based on NRENs, which Sarah mentioned earlier, but it also is a little bit wider than that. We need to reach out to absolutely all the decision makers within the universities, so that we can involve them in the definition of the production quality national scale sustainable service. Because it's all good and well that we have the pilot running by essentially 3 or 4 organizations in Ireland. It needs the buy-in of all the stakeholders for the design and for the governance model and the sustainable financial sustainability model as well. It will consider also the integration into the broader EOSC landscape. And of course, EUDAT is EUDAT services are perfectly well placed to support that. And we also need to come up with considerations on how to support research use cases with sensitive data. So my view, and not only my view, is that handling sensitive data is a huge project in itself. But we are aware of initiatives in Norway and in Finland, EUDAT and TSD, which to my mind are very large projects in themselves. And there's also some EU calls to deal with handling sensitive data, just being launched now. So for us to include that as a whole within our very small budget, it's not really feasible. However, we will look at, what do we need to consider, what needs to be taken into account, and linking perhaps into those other initiatives which are coming up for that. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you very much. If there are any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Roberto. And it's really interesting to see the different phases of the project, and that, you're going to be using the European infrastructure, the kind of DICE model, and then also deploying nationally. And it'll be good to see the feedback from researchers on those differences as well, and what they want and need. Any questions for Roberto? No. Okay, we can maybe hold them to the end for the kind of shared discussion. Then I'll invite Anssi to talk about the work that's going on at CSC.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anssi from CSC, the Finnish IT Center for Science. And my presentation is about, let's say, a service provider viewpoint and what we have needed to consider when setting up EUDAT services and what our operational environment is. And you might have a different kind of environment to consider. So let's hope we can get some discussion going. So CSC is a non-profit state enterprise. So we are owned by the state of Finland and Finnish higher education institutions. And this strongly limits how we can sell the services outside. And we can't really compete in the open markets. And why that is important is that CSC also provides these, let's call them Finnish fair data services, which are Ministry of Education service, which kind of covers many of the same use cases here. So we try not to overlap too much, providing the same service in 2 different categories. So our goal or viewpoint is that we provide these kind of special use case services with the EUDAT services for Finnish customers. Where's my mouse cursor? Here we go. Here's an example of the services we currently provide. So we, of course, provide the public EUDAT CDI beta share instance, which is a fair use or free service for the end users. And there are several communities there. But the main focus of my presentation is on the other categories. We have a National Research Institute. We have a couple of, let's say, generic research and education institutions like University of the Sciences. And then we have research infrastructures, which have also a long-term need for a service, but their use cases are more specialized and more narrow. And then we have a kind of a research project that might be part of an ongoing development towards a research infrastructure. And as you can see in this table, we have so-called premium services, which are, we contract the service to them and then we tailor them and so forth. And then we have these pilots, and I'll explain these a bit more in the future slides. As I mentioned, there's this special use case, and one of the main differences between the CSC EUDAT services and, let's say, the Finnish FEDETA services is that we provide tailoring for specific customer needs. That might be like a specific storage capacity, which might be in hundreds of terabytes, or it could be user management, integration, more options for the customer to self-manage their users and their quotas and so forth. We also provide this kind of tailoring for metadata, because EUDAT B2Share and EUDAT B2Find, they share the same EUDAT core metadata model, but some customers might have very specific needs they want to integrate into their production or research data management workflows. And then, as also mentioned earlier, this harvesting to increase the visibility and impact of the research done in an organization is to connect different services through harvesting. Like, for example, we have a B2Share, and the metadata is harvested toward FEDETA services, and from there to research.fi, and also towards the B2Find, and then to other services from B2Find. And then, of course, smaller details like branding make the service look more like this organization's own service. It's actually also not a branding issue in itself. It's also about usability. The users are more accustomed to use a service that looks a bit like they're something they're accustomed to. And there might be more deeper kind of support and consultation on data management policy and how to integrate between different services and options. Most of the talk will be about, let's say, productization, how to decide what kind of services we want to start producing. At the current moment, we are looking at the EUDAT services at CSC as, let's say, 4 categories. We have the deployment projects, and then we have production service, which is ongoing. And then we have a model for providing further development, tailoring or otherwise to the customers. And then, let's say, lightweight pilots. But where these have come from, this more like organic development throughout the years. But basically, we need to consider what are the usual customer types and what are the needs that we want to provide in the, let's say, next 5 or 10 years. What are our capabilities as an organization or service provider, to how to scale, how to repeat different kind of service or product, and how to remain cost effective, especially in the tailoring part. And how to package these as clear products. It might be, we don't want to provide just tailoring to whatever need they have. We want to provide these EUDAT services, which are basic packages, and there are some usual ways they can interlink and so forth, but we don't do anything possible. And the temptation to start tailoring to whatever interesting new development is always there. And one important point is how to position yourself or our services with other service providers within or without our organization, how to avoid the overlap, how to create these fruitful collaborations and integration options internationally and nationally. Sometimes we can be a subcontractor. EUDAT Limited can provide a service which can be an amalgamation of different EUDAT services from different EUDAT partners or service providers. Let's start with the deployment project. Usually these mean let's say one-shot costs of deploying a service to production. We want to have a repeatable kind of way of setting up a service for a new customer. There's a basic ICT cost and basic labor cost, but the main focus here is to provide a repeatable and reliable way of getting the customer on board into the service. And if at this point we feel that there's a lot of complications and some interesting developments of integration and so forth already cropping up, that might be an indication that there's a potential overreach. And we're going to kind of learn that it might be useful for the customer to, together with the customer, to talk about prioritization and what kind of stuff they need in the beginning, what can be interesting developments done later. So tailoring is a selling point, but it's also a business risk. It can be difficult sometimes to say, no, we are not necessarily willing to do this kind of integration. But in the long run, that is important for maintaining the product. So each and every customer doesn't get a completely different kind of a software stack, and things become more less cost effective that way. And in the long run, it might become unsustainable if we need a different service group for each instance, instead of benefiting from the shared processes. And once the customer has a service and they started using it, this is basically a repeatable production contract. The goal for us has been to create these kind of, until further notice, multi-year contracts. The basic content of the service remains the same. The costs need to be predictable for the customer and also for ourselves. That kind of stability is very important. In the beginning of setting up a new service, everybody has this interest of, okay, it could do this, and yeah, let's put that kind of feature there too. But in the long term, there always is some development, maintenance and stuff like that, but main focus is to be predictable. Usually it doesn't, buying a service is an investment for several years, so this is important. And one of the things we've learned is that labor is usually more expensive than, let's say, usual ICTP. Unless you're buying something like petabytes of storage space or something like that, then the servers are cheap. Relatively at least. In production, there's always these kind of risks in external dependencies. After a couple of years, maybe some service provider or component provider might be dropping out. They might be changing their licensing policies and costs and so forth. And having this kind of a method for managing the life cycle, seeing that, okay, there's an end-of-life version coming out of a product, we need to prepare beforehand for things like that. And then there's this interesting part, for us at least. It's usually more fun in the long term to be creating new things, trying out new interaction methods, or getting new interactions working and seeing how the services are connected outside. They might be interesting, let's say, processes, not necessarily technical processes, but human interaction processes or legal processes or whatever. These we need to keep up with throughout the years. But also we need to manage the expectations of the customers. They might have a lot of wild ideas that what are the new and exciting things to develop. But the way we managed to handle this so far is that we usually set a yearly budget specifically for this kind of further development. And then together with the customer, we discuss that what are the things they want to do next year. We set a prioritized list of this is the most important thing. This is how much we estimate that it will take time to develop. And then we set the goals for that year. And of course, during the year, we follow we track the progress, and we have this opportunity to work together with the customer. Okay, let's do it this way since the original plan became more difficult. Or they might have new interests popping up throughout the years, and we can adjust the goals. And sometimes we need to say no, that it sounds like an interesting feature, but it might not be sustainable for the software architecture or even hardware architecture or actually the whole purpose or scope of the service. We don't want to turn let's say B2Share service into something else. It usually is. We encourage to use these kind of reusable features. In the long term, it's a benefit for the whole community to have this kind of reciprocal development, having different things developed together with different customers, and after a while, they might be all benefiting together from those same features. Sometimes we need to agree on kind of embargoes that they are paying for this feature. They would like to have it for themselves for a while. And that's understandable from our customers' viewpoint as well. But we also have plans to develop this kind of a customer networking events in the long term, that they could talk to each other and discuss what they might be benefiting together. And maybe in the long term, this kind of further development can be agreed on a wider scope than just customer by customer. And then finally, a special case we call the pilots. These are limited time frame contracts, and usually they are paid by the customer or a suitable project, EU project or otherwise. The goal here is to have a minimal cost and as fast as possible kind of a deployment with lower kind of service level agreements and things like that. But the use case for these is to have a service instance for evaluating what this a specific B2 service might be for that customer for future potential contracts, production contract. Also, they've been used as platforms for the customers to develop their own research data management processes. They might not be interested in actual production service, or they might not be ready to store their production data, but they might be focusing on how to develop their own data management, ways of data management and workflows by having some kind of an example service they can freely play with. And those can also be part of this kind of wider consultation project, not just data management, but other parts like analysis and things going on at the same time. Or a research infrastructure might be developing a huge amount of different kind of processes, including many, many services. And maybe the EUDAT B2 service is just a small part there in the beginning pilots. Challenges in these pilots are, of course, how to maintain the limitations of the time and personal support we want to offer. And sometimes there's this vague line between, well, this is an actual production service, but, and then there's a lot of expectations that might be rolling in. And maybe at some point they see that, okay, we are at the stage that we probably need to start discussing an actual production service contract. So as a service provider, if you're considering of building your own service portfolio, let's say on top of EUDAT services, there are two basic things you need to worry about. One is the ICTP part and one is the personal part. This varies a lot depending on what your NREN or home organization is like. You might have a very different kind of offering of platform services, for example, or other internal processes. So I'm not sure if we can just provide an example. Let's do it this way. You always need to consider your own organization's processes and limitations and benefits. For us, we have a huge amount of servers. That's the basic building block we always talk about. We have training instances, pilot instances, demo and test instances, and then we have the actual production instances, which have production data. Some of them might have lower SLA targets because a demo instance doesn't need to be up and running all the time, or the data within a demo instance isn't as important as an actual production instance. Then we have this internal use development and staging instances. Whenever you're developing a new version or fixing a bug or whatever, you need another server you can rely on without breaking the actual production service. And then we have a bunch of tools. We have a separate database server, tools for deployment automation, secrets management, proxies, runners, bastions, and whatever. And these very strongly depend on what your organization's platforms are like, what are their security requirements, and so forth. Then there are, of course, other components that are provided by other internal or external partners. We have our own data center services, network services, server virtualization, storage platform services, authentication, and what's the other part of AI? Anyway, how to recognize a user, that kind of services and components, and tools for metadata harvesting. Some of them, these kind of tools might be more internal, not customer oriented, or that's necessarily not an operational part of the service, but still important, like monitoring how to manage different versions, releases, how to manage documentation internally and together with the customer, ticketing systems for whatever bugs or future development goals, and so forth. There's a lot of benefits of scale in these services, but it kind of depends on where you come from. And sometimes it can be challenging if the organization has a different specific kind of processes and services set up, and your needs might be towards some other direction, but then you just need to find out this kind of a golden path. People is mostly about ensuring the key skills. Then, of course, it's about how much time you have and what kind of collaboration you need, together with the organizational internal collaboration, collaboration with the EUDAT partners or external parties, and with the customers. Sorry, losing my voice a bit. One of the key people are, of course, our DevOps people, the people who actually work with the service code. Those are the people who maintain the software stacks and who are familiar with the beta services and whatever components they include. And also, they need to be skilled people in actually doing the production, maintenance of a service, and then developing new components and new features. Then we need the coordinators, people like me or Antti, who might be online in the audience. We take care of the customer cases. We take care of the coordination between with the EU projects or other projects, and with other services in the field, or even wider communities where research data management and research are talked about. We need to keep up to date with the developments. And then there's collaboration with and support outside the team. It's important to ask for and offer help. There needs to be some kind of reciprocity to make these things work. We need to collaborate with the beta service owners. BetaShare is the owner, product owner of BetaShare, but then we have other product owners for BetaDrop elsewhere in the EUDAT. And this kind of a collaboration needs to happen almost daily in some cases. And there's the customer relationship. We have people who are helping us in the sales from CSC and how to develop different customer solutions and negotiate with the contract and so forth. Then we have the internal tools and processes and policies, and there are several people taking care of security or privacy and so forth. And it's sometimes helpful to remember that it's possible to subcontract. Sometimes we need help outside the house. Usually these are short-term cases, and we try to avoid long-term subcontracting, because then it becomes a challenge that the key skills related to a specific part might be become completely outside the house. And after a couple of years, if we don't know how a single component works, we are in a risk. We try to maintain this basic knowledge of the services we are offering within the team or within the organization. And one important thing is, of course, always to improve the team. Recruitments and learning the ropes for new people, it always takes time. It might be half a year, 2 years, when you're up to the task, if it's a really challenging thing. But the team helps itself. There are new, younger people and older people, and it's an important and kind of a fun part of the having a different this kind of a service team, that seeing how people grow in the roles they have. And sometimes after a couple of years, they might be interested in different stuff, and then you need to organize who will start to take up the responsibilities in a task they didn't earlier have. And one of the things that important in this improvement is that different kinds of trainings and EUDAT events and hackathons and different events like RDA, plenaries and so forth, where you can learn different things in different scopes. So I'm not sure how much time we have left, but if we want to have some discussion, there are some points, not necessarily for this meeting, but if you are interested in providing any EUDAT service or whatever, these are the kind of questions we've had to deal with ourselves. How things fit the company strategy, for example. Are these the kind of services we want to offer in a strategic time span? What kind of different opportunities for the production platforms you have? Are there a lot of limitations and opportunities in the processes? There might be differences in legal statuses between the organization and country by country, even though European Union kind of helps in many ways in that regard. Lifecycle management is one thing. Early in the presentation, I showed you a list of customer organizations we had, and some of them are already ending their contracts after a couple of years. And in the long term, any software product will come to an end. So you need to start thinking about what is the next option to build that service on, or in a very long time span, does this service, is it any more like a sensible? You need to prepare for that kind of exit strategy. In the simplest form, it can be having a process for migrating the data of a customer to another platform, or being contractually and otherwise prepared for this kind of ending that comes. Scalability is one challenge always. We might have a platform that's designed to provide cheaply because it's one platform and it can handle several customers. But suddenly you might have a customer that wants several times the whole capacity you usually have. Then you need to think about, can we scale this existing platform up? Do we need to scale out, build a cluster, or maybe create a dedicated service just for them? And then you're handling with, okay, is it cheaper to manage that way, or what do you want to do? And at some point you might run into the requirement that, okay, we need to start investing in new people, new skill sets, and that's a long path to take.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say. So any questions, suggestions?
Thank you very much, Anssi. Really useful overview of the way that you're providing these services to the different Finnish customers. Any quick questions for Anssi? Just raise a hand or unmute if you want. I'll maybe just ask one as we let Debora set up. So you mentioned that the tailoring can be a big risk, like a kind of threat to the business if you're trying to deliver too many different things. And I think you alluded to the fact that you wanted to try and bring customers together a little bit to understand their different needs. Is that something you're wanting to do like on the Finnish level, or given that EUDAT is being run in different countries, like in the Netherlands as well, are you trying to do that collectively across all of the different partners in EUDAT?
I think both.
Yeah.
In Finland, it might be easier for us to organize this kind of thing. Because we can manage what we want to provide, and we have a clearer say on, okay, this is what CSC provides. And the Finnish research organizations, they have experiences of working together in, let's say, in the fair data context or any other context. On the European level, we have this kind of same kind of planning with the other EUDAT partners that these are the roadmaps of what we are planning to do for the service in the long term. But it might be more difficult to decide that, okay, this is what we want to develop, because then you're negotiating more between the partners, and there might be different limitations between the partners providing that service.
Yeah.
Of course, the EUDAT conferences, for example, might be a very fruitful platform for having this kind of discussion with the customer groups and customer organization groups. It's sometimes difficult to discern between the paying customer and then the end user.
Yeah.
We might have very, very different kinds of goals.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Thank you very much, Anssi. So the last speaker is Debora, who's going to talk about ways in which you can engage in EUDAT.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So the presentation before me were very exhaustive in providing an overview of different kind of work that has been done so far. So I will just quickly wrap up, starting from the presentation we've just heard, and just take a few minutes so that we have enough time for discussion later. So, so first of all, as you might have understood from the quick presentation we have given today, we have challenges in research data management because it's very complex, and also because the needs of research community, our research community are organized, is very heterogeneous. So many times we need tailored solutions to specific user needs. At the same time, data management and storage cannot be easily dissociated from the computing and analysis and processing of data, but they have a very different requirements in terms of period of service. So for data management, we talk typically of more than 10 years, while for calculation, simulation, analysis is normally less than a year. Or, I mean, you can really wrap up a number of short period of time to get the call. So there are some challenges. So first of all, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we aim to provide services across disciplines. So all the EUDAT services has been designed and implemented to be as generic as possible, so to be used in any scientific domain. And we currently serve about 17 different scientific domains. So it's really just to prove that we really, our services are not really tailored to a specific domain, even if customization can be done if needed by a specific scientific community. And I already said service can be used each one by itself or in combination. So we have different strategy depending on the different scenarios of usage. So the main two categories are single researcher or communities or university or a group of researchers. So end user or single researchers can normally make use of our free central services that are provided by some of the EUDAT providers, or use community service. While data managers of community or projects or university have a bigger, say, plethora of options that they can rely on. They can use data storage on B2Save, they can use B2Drop and sync and share service, as Roberto presented. They can acquire prefix and PID and many other things. So And at the end, as I already said, we can all the time customize a specific tailored solution for a specific community or specific institution based on the needs. To wrap up, there are, I think, two main categories of ways to collaborate between NRENs and EUDAT. So the first one is NREN making use of the services provided by EUDAT partners, EUDAT service providers, for their users. That can mean using as I mentioned, the instances of the services we already have, like the central B2Drop instance or the central B2Share instance, but also we can provide dedicated instances. So for let's say a B2Share instance, as Antti is doing for, or CSC is doing for the Finnish community, we can have a dedicated B2Share instance for a specific community or specific university. But still hosted at the EUDAT site, EUDAT service provider. So, and this can be done either having as, let's say, customer in a way, individual university, or as mentioned at the very beginning, and NRENs can act as broker. So we can have this collaboration at NREN levels, and then university would rely on the NRENs to get the service. So we normally in this case provide support together with the offering of the service. So we normally deal with our users to reply to question or clarify issue or solve problems, hopefully as less as possible in the future, but there might always happen some issue, and we always provide this kind of support. The other possibility is very similar to what Roberto mentioned. So to have NRENs to become provider of data management services for their national users. That can be, for example, relying on EUDAT services, but in general, so deploying services at the national level to satisfy the needs of your university and research centers. As we have done with Roberto and the Irish project, obviously EUDAT team is happy to support to provide consultancy on how a national infrastructure or specific data management service has to be set up, because we have experience in that. So we think it's useful to share our experience with others. And obviously we can offer support during the setup if needed. So these, I think, are, was my sum up. So these, I think, are the two main ways of collaborating. Obviously, there can be also something in between, or starting from one and then moving to the others. But I think these are the two main categories that I was thinking of. But if there are any other ideas, we are happy to hear other possibilities or other feeling from our attendees today.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Deborah. Yeah, no, I think the case studies gave us good examples as well as of how you can provide the services, but also you've got the centrally hosted EUDAT instances that the users can use if NRENs aren't wanting to deliver the services themselves. So, any questions from the audience about the different models you could use to pick up EUDAT services, or about functionality or anything else?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, Kurt,
Sarah,
go ahead.
To the last presentation, it was explained that customers you can customize the service individually in this case. And the aim would be also, or more in the contradiction way, that you should be also as generic as possible, right? Customizing and generic as possible. This comes up with the question, how to cope with data quality in this context.
So you're right. So I would say that the design of the EUDAT services from its very beginning and how they are implemented to be generic. So indeed, and this is absolutely our, let's say, golden rule for all the central instances we host. So B2Drop or B2Share will always be as generic as possible. As Anssi mentioned, obviously, if there is an idea for a community that can be of value for everyone, we would adopt it, but it's really meant to be generic. While obviously when we set up a dedicated instance for a specific group, then obviously we can tailor a bit and, for example, add a specific metadata schema or add a specific way of sharing the data with user because it's specific, but is relying on the same, let's say, building block of generic service we developed at the beginning. Hope I have answered your question. Maybe.
Yes,
Anssi,
absolutely. Absolutely. I have a small one for the next one, the last one. How do you cope with the quality of the data? You will get different kind of quality at the end probably, and you have to harmonize probably to synchronize all the data. And this, how do you care about this process?
Okay, so so obviously it depends on which service we are talking about. I think quality of data is particularly important for data that are published. So at the end of the research data lifecycle. And in our B2Share instance, we develop for this what we call core metadata schema. That is what we consider the minimum amount of information each researcher should provide associated to a data set. The metadata schema can be then enlarged to have more fields, but that is what we think is the minimum that is needed to have a meaningful data set published. But then beside that, then the quality of the data itself, it's up to the single, researcher or community that is going to publish it. What we can control is the amount of information that is associated with the data set and with and that is published online.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just to add a small detail. For example, in the B2Share and B2Find instances, they both use the same shared EUDAT core schema, which is based on data sites schema. And that's as Debora mentioned, that's the basis of interoperability within EUDAT and also outside EUDAT. Usually the customer extensions of the metadata might be oriented towards more supporting, let's say, automation of their own processes. It might not be the kind of details they are adamant of sharing to the wide world, but they might be part of, let's say, handling their data ingestion processes or something like that. But the important part is the core scheme.
Yes. Okay.
Sarah, I think you're muted.
Sorry, apologies for that. Thanks, Leo. So I was just actually going to pick up on this tailoring point, and I wondered how the balance kind of falls between the different kind of ways in which people can use EUDAT. So using the kind of generic centrally hosted service versus something that you do as a kind of bespoke service for users. Do you have a sense of the proportion of users in each of those categories?
Okay, let's say the interface in the two scenarios is different. So for the generic services, we are talking about the end users. Okay, so it's order of few thousand or maybe more. I don't know. While for the dedicated instance, we normally interface with a data manager so then how many of users are behind these instances, I would have to check with each individual center. But let's say that normally the number of requests are more for using the service as it is than for having a customized solution. That might bit of a perception, more the actual numbers, but that would be my feeling so far.
Yeah. And that's good in terms of the sharing, because it's, you might not be able to transfer things across the different instances as well, and particularly the more customizations they have. Other questions anyone wants to raise or comments?
Just to add to the user numbers, there are very different kinds of customer communities, even in the shared public B2Share instance. There are a couple of dozen different communities there. but the number of users and how much data they publish can vary case by case. Some are very actively pushing new data sets all the time. Some might be publishing 1 or 2 data sets per year or something like that. And one important case of group of users are actually the passive ones who just, let's say, download data. They are not actively publishing new, but they are reusing the contents, and they are more difficult to track of how many of those there are.
Yeah.
And also some customer organization oriented dedicated instances, they might have a couple of hundred potential users. Let's say they provide a beta drop to every single faculty member or even student of that research organization, education organization, but their usage profiles vary a lot. Some might be using beta drop for a specific course, and they're suddenly uploading data from dozens of users and then being quiet for the rest of the year. So the total numbers are really difficult to also evaluate. What does this mean for our service development needs?
Any other questions or comments, Kurt?
Yes, and how do you care about the accuracy of the data? So that you have actual data available every time with these different kind of activities of the data providers. How do you handle this? Means in the automation process that you have elaborated or such kind of special functions?
Depends on the service. B2Share is oriented towards publishing data, so that's meant to be always available, and we promote this kind of open availability. Of course, it's possible to have what's the period? A specific period of time you need to wait before it can be published once it's in a paper. Or it can also be just metadata because there's something sensitive in the actual files and you're not publishing them. But other services, let's say beta drop, they are mostly used for, let's say, internally sharing stuff or sharing directly with your colleagues in another organization. But those are mostly files. They are not data sets as a whole. They are in different part of the life cycle. And also B2Safe might have a really automated process, and it might have a lot of traffic of publishing and so forth, but the scope of users might be very small within that research infrastructure, for example. And usually the more, as Debora mentioned, mature data set, they are usually published elsewhere, let's say B2Share. One detail. Once we think about data sets that have been published, it's usually the responsibility of the community, let's say the customer or a specific sub-community, to manage the life cycle of the data set. We take care of the files that they're not broken or anything like that. But if after 5 years you need to adjust something, it's up to the owner of the data to take care of it, or the community. They relinquish the ownership to.
Yeah, and for this, just to complement, and for this, there is a special, let's say, a feature in B2Share where you can not substitute. I mean, you can upload a file saying it's a new version of a previous file, so you don't have to modify the description, but you just upload a new version, and this is tracked so that you can indeed maintain the up-to-date of your data set if something changes over time.
Yeah. Excellent. Any final questions before we close? No? Maybe just one kind of basic one from me. If another NREN was wanting to do something like Roberto's doing with the pilot, or to run services on a commercial basis like CSC's doing, how do they get started? Like, who should they reach out to within EUDAT?
It's very easy. You can just go to the EUDAT website, which is eudat.eu. There is a contact page just right there, and all the right people will be notified. So we will get back to you, and then normally we organize a couple of conference calls to understand what is needed and then move forward from there. So it's just contact us via the website and it will be the most easy way to reach us.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your talks and for your questions.
Thanks to you.
And we'll put all the slides and the recording up online. And yeah, watch out for future webinars and InfoShares coming up. There's a whole program on events at GÉANT. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.